I would say that the North is open for business, but it's not carte blanche. It's not going to be the Wild West. You have to come up and say, look, here's our project. Here are the benefits. Here's the work we've done. Here's our track record and experience. Here's why we think this one makes sense.
Welcome to WONK. The One Canadian Economy Act is supposed to streamline new projects in Canada, and big resource projects are probably on that list. Can the government pursue those nation-building projects while also answering some other aims, including securing our sovereignty over Canada's Arctic region? One thing is clear: mining is back in fashion. This week's guest helped grow Agnico Eagle into the largest miner in the country and second largest gold player in the world. Sean Boyd is chair of Agnico Eagle. Welcome.
Nice to be here, Amanda.
Let's start with what you're hoping for. We have this kind of sense of urgency around big projects in this country. As somebody who's seen big projects from an idea through to fruition, what's your hope and what are your fears about the atmosphere right now?
Yeah, I think our hope is that, and we've been trying to articulate this in Ottawa over the last 3 years, is to really understand the opportunity that exists in the far north and the potential that exists not just in the resources, but in the people. And we need a strategy and we need a well-articulated strategy to the country, but we also need a plan of action. And it's okay to say, oh, we're going to build this and we're going to build that. But unless we coordinate our efforts, we're not going to get maximum benefit of the investments that are going to be made going forward. So it's really an action plan focused on getting results and starting now.
So when you talk about a strategy for the North, what kinds of things are we talking about? What's on your list of a good strategy there?
Well, it's really to look at the North from its potential perspective, but also based on our responsibilities to the people of the North, to Canadians in general, our responsibilities in North America to protect the northern flank. So it's a sovereignty issue as well, but it's also an issue around understanding the true potential that exists in the North. But it's going to take a lot of hard work and a lot of effort. It won't be easy. We know that. We've been operating up there for almost 20 years. But we need to start working now. And I think it's not about trying to manage, in our view, what's happening to the south of us. It's trying to just focus on our own business and what opportunities exist in front of us. So we're at the forefront. And specifically, what's Agnico looking for? I'd say a more streamlined regulatory framework. As far as infrastructure investment, we're going to still grow our business up there, regardless of what infrastructure is put in. We're going to reopen Hope Bay. It's a critical project. So we're going to keep doing business up there, but we need more companies like us doing business and investing significant dollars up there.
So in terms of that, the infrastructure that might attract other players, as you say, Agnico has developed mines in the North successfully, has others that are underway. What would have made your life easier? What would smooth the path for others to do business there?
I think it's really regulatory reform first and foremost, but it's also strategic and selected infrastructure that has potential dual use. So the government's talking about things like new ports, that's clearly a need. And as we think about the North, and forget about business for a minute, let's look at the Northwest Passage. That needs to be developed. We need ports there. That's the future. And we're going to need help from the Americans to be able to do it. So that will happen over time. Roads are really important. We're the largest road builder up there. We build them on our own based on what we need to get our projects developed. The government has to get more involved in that. But there's also another angle, and this is part of where we're in the middle of. We saw opportunities a few years back. Why aren't we talking to the Canadian military? We have tremendous logistical capacity based on being there for almost 20 years, but also we're north of the Arctic Circle in Finland, so we're the predominant Arctic miner. We know the Canadian government's going to invest a lot of money from a defense perspective in the North. We have responsibilities. We know we can help the Canadian military do that work faster. We know we can do it cheaper. And we've started discussions, early discussions at the very senior levels of the Canadian military, not the Department of National Defense, not the politicians, not the bureaucrats, but the military leadership so that they understand our capabilities. We understand what their thoughts are, what their plans may be. And that's just an example of the coordination and working together that we need in this country now to take maximum advantage of the opportunity.
And I'm going to come back to that because there's a lot of pieces of Arctic sovereignty that a lot of Canadians want to understand. It's kind of an easy phrase to bandy about. But in that same vein, there's this talk about streamlining the regulatory process, fast-tracking projects, making it one office, not multiple offices. Mm-hmm. You know, from operating in the region for this long and through periods where it wasn't so easy, where there were very high bars to cross to get deals done, the fear that is raised through that kind of talk is the trampling of rights, right? That we're going to run roughshod over First Nations, over climate concerns. How do you assuage those fears? What do you say to Canadians who say, including those groups, but also other well-intentioned Canadians who worry about climate change, who worry about our pristine north, mm-hmm. and want to hear that that's all still going to be respected?
Well, I think it depends on the partners, and it's really a partnership. And we've been successful in the north because when we said to ourselves, when we first went up there to consider our first deal in 2007, we said to ourselves heading up there, remember, we're visitors. We're visitors. And we were welcome with open arms, and we weren't being prejudged at the time. Oh, you must be bad, you're from the south, or you must be bad because you're a mining company. It's no, how do we work together? So those are going to be at the individual level between resource development companies and Indigenous partners. At the end of the day, each project has its unique attributes and opportunities and risks and challenges. But I think it's the trust that sort of lays the foundation to get the right result with individual projects. And it comes down to respect. So it can be done. And when you think about our business, is that we've built one of the largest public companies in the country with 3/4 of that revenue coming from Canada. So despite how challenging and difficult it was, we were still able to do it and able to manage it. And so there will be a messaging opportunity or challenge. There is a communications piece to this. And there's no doubt that the government has to make a case to 40 million Canadians why the North is important and why we should be investing in the North and how we're going to do it. And they have to connect the dots for us. They have to say, this is the opportunity. This is why it makes sense to invest. This is how we're going to do it. Here's the upside, but here are the risks. Here's how we're going to manage the risks. Here's how we're going to keep track of how successful we are. And I think that's what we really should be looking for from the current government. It's not how they can manage an administration to the south. No one can manage that. That's kind of unmanageable. It's how do we actually take advantage of our own opportunity and do it in a very organized, systematic, well thought out fashion.
So let's go back to Arctic sovereignty. You said the North matters. Why does that matter? I mean, and I don't mean, of course, there's a whole part of the Canadian Arctic that matters to Canada. It belongs to us. We have assets there. You have assets there. But why does the sovereignty of the Arctic come into play? Why is that an issue at all?
Well, I think as we, look at our allies, they have a keen interest in the North. Our adversaries have a keen interest in the North. And it's really the future because of its untapped potential, not just from a resource perspective, but also from the people perspective. So there's also a responsibility there as we think about sovereignty's presence. And for a company that sort of is 365 days a year, 24/7, we understand how important that presence is. And we're not going to really do an effective job on sovereignty unless at the end of the day, we end up with stronger communities, more prosperous families in those communities. So it's really how can we pull it together? And that's where the Northwest Passage comes into. We have to give a lot of thought to how we manage that because we know how the Russians and the Chinese, view their part of the Arctic. They're active, they're investing. We're way behind in our investment. We're way underinvested. So again, we have to make a case to Canadians because they've got to write the check. So we have to do it responsibly. And that's infrastructure investment. But this can't be a shotgun approach. We can't pay for everything. The government has to lead along with industry because industry knows where the impact can happen quickly with the projects it has. So we can really help the government understand where the emphasis should be.
There, of course, is only Northwest Passage access because of climate change. And it will only become more accessible because of climate change. No. The fear is that as we populate it and use it, build ports there, we'll exacerbate the very kind of polluting effects that have caused it to open up in the first place.
Yes, and so you're going to get warming, and we have to do what we can. And part of mining is the metals for energy transition. So again, we have to do this responsibly. It's a pristine part of the world, but we can take our lead and our guidance from our Indigenous partners who have protected the land and survived on the land in the harshest of environments on the planet for thousands of years. And if we think of Nunavut, and it's a place we know well, we're almost a quarter of the economy. The way that Nunavut was created, the Inuit essentially took back a significant chunk of the landmass as part of the deal with the federal government, and they selected those initial parts that they would have direct ownership in based on their geological potential. So we have the basis to sort of work together, but we have to respect people's interests and understand how we do it. So we look at Hope Bay. So we have a permit for an initial wind turbine. So ultimately, we want more wind turbines. So there is a way to develop the North in a greener, more sustainable way from an energy perspective. Ultimately, it is likely that small modular reactors are what helps to unlock the potential in the North. And we need to understand that. And we need to understand the potential there. Agnico's working on that as well. But in order to implement those in the North, you're going to need trusted partners. You're going to need companies and people that the Inuit trust to do that properly. So we come back to trust again. So again, this won't be easy. This is not an easy place to do business, but it's one of tremendous potential, and we have to seize the opportunity.
Yeah, you mentioned that, you've been there since 2007. The trust and relationships take time to build. We're in this atmosphere, Sean, where we are looking for big projects. The government is looking for a priority list of nation-building projects, which of course implies some speed. How do you square that with the time it takes to build the trust?
Yeah, I think that it'll depend on, I think Canadian companies based in Canada, run by Canadians, have an advantage because we have the mindset, we have the sensibilities, knowing how to do business, but we need international capital as well. So that becomes a little bit more challenging depending on where that capital is coming and who's going to deploy that capital. So that will be something that will have to be managed. But I would say that the North is open for business, but it's not carte blanche. It's not going to be the Wild West. You have to come up and say, look, here's our project. Here are the benefits. Here's the work we've done. Here's our track record and experience. Here's why we think this one makes sense. And we're sitting on one and have been sitting on one for a while, Hope Bay. And it's an interesting story because ultimately it'll end up ticking so many boxes, so many policy boxes that as Canadians we need to sort of tick. And it was owned by, or potentially almost owned by, a mining entity of the Chinese government. And under foreign investment review, the Liberal government said, no, we don't think that's in our national interest to have that project located where it is on the northern coast, owned by a foreign government. And Agnico picked it up in basically 2 weeks over the Christmas holidays, negotiating with the debt holders, the shareholders, including the Chinese company. And we put it on care and maintenance because we thought it was going to be bigger. And basically, all it was trying to control some very prospective geology. So we're getting close now, based on our work. We're not quite there, but maybe early next year to say, look, we're going to reopen this. And this is a significant project. It's potentially $2 billion of new investment to build something much bigger than what it was there. So you tick the sovereignty box, the resource development box, the green energy box, the economic reconciliation box, because there's tremendous participation in terms of royalties from the local Inuit Association. So this could be a model for how to get these things done so that they have maximum impact.
Yeah, it's an interesting time because, as you say, we've taken a more sovereign approach to capital and investment. And this goes back now a few years, but we've rejected foreign capital. Now, it's easier, I think, Sean, to say, you don't want China controlling assets we might call strategic, although things are called strategic in very strategic ways, convenient ways. But what about U.S. capital? What about, European capital? Is it harder to justify, given that we're talking about a part of the world where we need to plant flags and stake claims and, so we need to own our Arctic? Is it harder to justify the capital that a company like yours is looking for? You want investors. $2 billion is a lot of money. How do we justify those two things, that it needs to be Canadian, but we also have to find a way to let international money in?
Yeah, I think we can do both. And I think there are opportunities to do both. And if you look at the international capital that owns projects, those are companies that already have a big presence in Canada. The Rios, the BHPs, like those are important companies that around the world do important business and do it responsibly, not always responsibly, but no one's perfect. But, those are companies that we could see doing more business here. And those are companies that I think Canadians can trust to do things the right way. So I think streamlining your regulatory reform, putting strategic infrastructure in the right places in the north, create better conditions for better returns. And this is not easy. So Hope Bay was owned by Newmont. And Newmont, when they bought Miramar and had the project, ultimately they went for well over $2 billion and decided, no, this is too tough, and back to Denver they went. So again, it's an example that it's not easy, but it can be done. And in a way, you have to be patient, but you have to move. And a big part of what we've been saying the last few years in Ottawa is, look, here's how we see the opportunity, because mining wasn't getting any attention. People weren't paying a lot of attention. Everybody likes to say good things about the North, but when it comes to writing a check, everybody sort of pulls back. And that's all governments. And so we were saying, look, don't miss this opportunity. We were talking about Arctic strategy prior to COVID. And isn't it funny how things have unfolded given what's happened to the south of us? This is much more important. We're good at this, though. As a country, mining was a big part of how we got such a great country. Mining's well positioned because we do it well and we have the expertise to do more. We just have to be smart about it.
There is obviously a sense of, I don't want to say austerity, because even with 15% cuts over 5 years, it takes us back still way above where we were in 2019. But there's a cutting happening in Ottawa, department by department. The government, though, also plans to change how it accounts for its spending. Is it your hope that the things you're talking about, infrastructure, maybe it's roads in the north, whatever it is that the government might do, will fall on the part of the ledger that's protected from having to be measured in terms of deficits, debt to GDP?
No, I think these things, some of this is nation building, but it can be nation building with an understanding of what the return is. The return may take a little bit longer. I think when you think about entities like the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, I think the pencil's too sharp there. You're never going to find something if you mine building in the north. It's not all science. There's an art to it. The best value actually gets created once the production platform is up and running. And that value sometimes is not apparent when you're running your numbers. And so you have to be a little bit creative. I think the government has to be a little bit creative. But again, it can't be, look, we're just going to throw money at it. And that's why we started conversations with the Canadian military to the point where we're saying to them, we may be finished at Meadowbank in 3 to 4 years. That's a massive facility. Airstrip, generators, 600 to 700 person camp, right near the geographic center of Canada. Take a look at it. Maybe you can use it. Get a dot on the map. May not be in the best location for you, but look at it. We're building Hope Bay. Why aren't we building you maybe a training facility nearby where we can share infrastructure? So those are the types of things that we have to talk about to make sure that we maximize the investments.
When we talk about infrastructure, obviously we can talk about things like roads in the north, et cetera. But there's other infrastructure that matters in the north. You're really close to that. What are we talking about?
Well, we call it social infrastructure, and it is designed. It's investment in training. It's investment in housing. It's investment in food security, because sovereignty is really presence, which is really strong communities. And this whole push to look for and try to understand the resource potential of the north really should begin and end in the strength and the prosperity of the communities and the families within the communities. There's tremendous needs there. And so we need to get that right. And so we can't just think a port's going to be the be all and end all or a road. We have to focus on the communities because that's where the workforce is going to come from. That's where the hope and opportunity is in those communities. And they desperately need that now.
What are some of those social infrastructure investments you would like to see? What would make a difference?
Well, housing's important. So this is the first year where we've been able to help a little bit on housing. And really the initiative was 20 housing units, bringing them up on our barges this season. And they will be assembled, 10 of them in Baker Lake and 10 of them in Rankin Inlet. And it's just to add capacity to what they're doing there. And we're going to expand that next year. We're going to do more houses. And so that's a small initiative, but this is really important because the housing stock is not there. It's worn down. You need a home. If you're going to be successful in school, you need a place to study. So it comes down to the basics, and we can do both. And as Canadians, it's our sensibility to make sure we do it right. And so that's why we're hopeful when we look at what resources and proper resource development can end up doing in the North. It can really be helpful at the community level and create a much brighter future, particularly for the young people that live up there now.
So interesting. And of course, one of the things that you have done with Agnico Eagle is build this global gold giant. And I do want to ask you about your view of gold. It's a funny thing, and it obviously has come in and out of favor in different ways over time. Where do you think its value will lie in the years ahead? And how much does the recent kind of turbulence and volatility, courtesy of the U.S. government, help the case for gold?
Yeah, I think the turbulence in the U.S. is impacting the U.S. dollar and impacting investors' view on will this be the world reserve currency as we move forward? So the run in gold is really central bank buying, largely Chinese buying, but we need to step back, past the last 3 or 4 years and go back to even 2010, where the Chinese announced we're going to open up our market for the importation of gold for the first time. So this is a long game for them. And so it's really positioning relative to the two main adversaries, relative to their currencies and the importance of their currencies. And then you throw the other disorder around the world. We've got we went through decades of certainty, order, low interest rates, low inflation, markets generally behaving. We had a few crises, but all in all, investors could understand the market. What's the future going to hold now? So gold is actually performing the way it's supposed to perform. And here we are at 3,300, almost 3,400. The world's not ending. Stock markets are near record levels. So gold's doing extremely well. And I think it's going to continue to do well. The costs of finding it and producing it aren't going down. They're only going up. So supply is not going to flood the market. So there's a lot of constructive points here. And then now we have some of the cryptos, the stable coins, looking for gold backing. So is that another source of demand? So I think the underlying environment continues to be very positive for gold.
You do. I mean, it's certainly true that the easy gold has been mined and was mined a long time ago, and that many of the deposits in the world now are in not just hard to reach places, but in politically unstable places. You do business right around the world. Can you compare what it's like to do business in Canada in terms of ease of doing business? And I'm not being facetious there. Obviously, there are things about doing business here that are going to be easier than a developing country. But there are things that are going to be harder too. Give us the kind of insider's view of how hard it is here versus other countries.
Yeah, it's as you mentioned, we built our business here, and it didn't matter which government was in power, because it's been over almost 7 decades. So you just put your head down, you focus on the underlying quality of the opportunity and work it. So we're very comfortable here. And we built a company by trying to find the right geology in countries that we could see a multi-decade opportunity to create a bigger business. And we didn't want to be everywhere. We didn't have the skills to be everywhere. So we were very focused. So we're in Mexico. Headlines suggest not a great place. It's actually a very modern, from a mining law and regulatory and tax perspective, very good. Finland, low tax jurisdiction, 20% effective national tax rate. People would think, oh, it's big. Canada's effective tax rate is high. In Quebec, it's almost 50%. So people don't realize that as well. The benefits that are flowing not just to the government coffers, but to the Indigenous partners, are massive. And the average wage, a mining wage, is twice the industrial wage in Canada. So there's tremendous financial benefits here. So we clearly like it here. This was our foundation, our platform. We developed our skills. We were selective of where we went. We think that's a good model. You're not going to find us in Africa. We don't understand how to do business there. So we also, and why we're excited, we see a lot more opportunity here in Canada to do more. And so that's got us excited.
7 decades in business, multiple governments over the course of that time. I'm curious for your view of what the relationship is between government and business today. And I mean with this government, and by that I mean both politically and in the bureaucracy. Because there have been times, Sean, when it seems to me that government has been kind of more or less hostile to the business community, at least in public language. Is there an open door? Is there conversation? Or is there consultation? Big projects are being considered. Is business at the table in those conversations?
Yeah, and so I've been doing this for 40 years. I think for the first 37 years, effectively, I maybe went to Ottawa 2 or 3 times. We didn't need anything. We just built the business. But I've been going because I transitioned to executive chair and then chair. So I had some time. And I felt that the government wasn't understanding what the opportunity was. We weren't going and asking for anything. And so I went there with actually low expectations because all I knew what I would read on the news. And I was actually impressed with some cabinet ministers. That they had their hearts in the right place. They were very astute, very smart people, working extremely hard, but I felt they were operating with handcuffs. They couldn't do what they needed to do, particularly in the resource space. And I think that was philosophy with the government of the last 10 years. And so the transition here has been refreshing. The meetings we've had and the ability to get meetings has been a lot better. And it was sort of no nonsense. The first meeting we had in the resource space with the cabinet minister, no nonsense. Look, here's what we're going to do. How does it affect you? And I said, well, that's good that you're doing this. We're going to build Hope Bay anyways. It doesn't help us at Hope Bay. Oh, why not? It's up there. Well, here's why. Oh, put it on a map. Oh, well, I can draw it, but I don't know exactly where it is. I can get you a map that'll have it all out there. I need it this afternoon. We'll get it for you. So it's that type of urgency that's there. Now, the story is just starting. So we need follow through. And I think what we need is it will be important to speak to Canadians directly. And we need to understand the full picture. And Canadians aren't stupid. They understand. So let's connect the dots for Canadians and say, this is why we're taking this share of the pie and we're investing it in resource development in the north. And by the way, we're going to grow the pie. And here's how we're going to grow it. I think in the past, we weren't as focused on growing the pie. Now we are. And so be upfront. Tell people what the plan is. And so we can help with that messaging as industry. And we've been trying to do that, and we're going to do more. Agnico and some industry players are going to shortly raise the profile on mining, raise the profile around its history and how it helped to build the country and how well it's positioned going forward. Because that story isn't well told. The benefits that mining brings has not been well told. That's on us as an industry. We're going to do more, but it's also should have consistent messaging with the government.
And I guess one question that I would have is whether in this new era of getting deals done, focus on resources, and as you say, in a new way, in an unapologetic way, if you will, there's a lot of talk about critical minerals. And there obviously Canada already mines and develops some of them, but there are some that are kind of nascent and that, we talk about the Ring of Fire. We've been talking about the Ring of Fire for 50 years. Is there any concern by you and others in more traditional categories that will draw oxygen away from maybe kind of more mundane things, but that could have a more immediate payoff?
Not really. And it's a good question because gold's sort of excluded from that conversation. But we say don't do that because without the gold industry and where it stands today in Canada, and the strong foundation it's built and the relationships it has and the skill sets and experience it has. Without that, there is no critical metals business in the future, given where we operate and how we operate as a gold industry. So that was a bit of an awakening for some when we
What do you mean
explained.
by that?
Well, there is a unrealistic expectation among politicians, both in Canada and in Washington. I've been to Washington, on how quickly we can ramp up a critical metals industry in North America. And I can also say my sense is that talking to people in the US, immigration's number one policy for them. Critical metals is in the top three. But it's really in the top three because of the disadvantage that the US finds himself relative to China. And I've sat in meetings in Washington where I've been told that they're getting Greenland and they know what they're going to pay for it. And I said, well, that's interesting. I said, we kind of know why they want it, but the impression is there's lots of critical metal deposits for them to build there. I said, no, there isn't, because if there were, they'd be built already. So there's a real mismatch between how quickly politicians think we can ramp things up and the realities on the ground for mining companies. Many of these things still need to be discovered, but you're not going to get to them unless you're building infrastructure, investing. It's much easier to find these things once you've built out more production bases in the far north because it's cheaper to explore. So that still has to be worked out. And just because the government invests whatever number they're going to invest in the north, there's not a lot of critical metals deposits that are going to pop up. Now, I've been warning the government. I've been saying, be careful, because this is mining. And a lot of projects come out of the bottom drawer. They've been sitting there for decades. They get all dusted up and they're presented to government and bureaucrats. And sometimes the government and bureaucrats don't know which way is up on these projects. Got to be careful what you invest in. And you also have to make sure, Ring of Fire, I'm not that well educated on it. Who knows? But if the government's going to make a major commitment to something like the Ring of Fire, make sure the companies that own the projects, it's their number one priority before we as taxpayers start to invest a lot of money there. Ask that question.
And I guess that's a very good point. And I guess we could add that investors should be a little cautious too, because junior mining companies might suddenly get a lot of attention because they're kind of in a headline that might not actually have any substance to it.
True. And so that's why we have to be careful, and that's why we have to coordinate. And I think what I hear is the government being more open for discussing sort of big picture, where the emphasis should be, how do we get the maximum benefit? And the first question I was asked is, we kind of like this infrastructure project, kind of think it kind of makes sense. What's the direct economic benefit to you, Agnico Eagle, in your business? And I said, there isn't one, but you should still do it because it's going to open up this part of the Arctic. And there's several projects there that are not owned by Canadian companies that may now have a chance, and they're important metals.
Given everything we've heard about how fast people want to move, how well-intentioned the government is on big projects, as somebody who knows how these things are, long, complex, costly, what does fast look like when we're talking about resources?
Well, there's two parts to that. The permitting part can be onerous, and you hit on it earlier when you said multiple layers, numerous jurisdictions looking at things. We can improve that. But once you get the green light to build and you get a satisfactory rate of return, we can actually build a multi-billion-dollar project in Canada's far north in 2 to 3 barge seasons. And that's logistical capacity that doesn't exist in the government. And we're telling them that. And we're telling the Canadian military that. And we're telling them some of our logistical, I would say, feats that we do in terms of managing diesel shipments and how we build infrastructure. The U.S. State Department's been to our mines. They clearly want to know what are the logistical capacity in the north. So it's then how do we do that? So once you get the green light, once you're happy with the return, you can move fairly quickly, which is a good thing. Now, gold, you can move quicker. Critical metals and base metals, you need the big infrastructure because you're managing concentrates. And the biggest question for critical metals in terms of the strategic advantage is China's advantage is they process them. So China's been running around accessing the deposits, knowing they have the processing capabilities. Canadian mining was at its peak. Noranda, Falconbridge, Inco, Alcan all had processing facilities. So at some point, North Americans have to decide, If this is really that important, we may find the deposits and have the deposits, but are we going to process them here? And that should be part of the discussion and clearly part of the strategy.
And I guess I want to ask you, because of course, over time, that's a decision that we have allowed to be made by cost of capital, right? Why don't we refine oil? Because the margins are terrible. So let's send it down to Louisiana and Texas and let them do it there. I think we think of it now differently and more strategically, and like control of our supply chain is the central question. So do we sacrifice, and I'm asking you, would you sacrifice your profit margin to process something because it then becomes more strategic, more in your control?
I think it would depend on what we saw as the opportunity over multi-decades to build a bigger and stronger business. That's the view we've always sort of taken when we've looked at these things. I think what we do know over my 4 decades is that, you used to be able to build a mine for a couple $100 million, then it was $500 million, then it was billions. Now it's multi-billions, and it's getting tougher. And so governments around the world may realize it now. They haven't realized it over the last few years. They need to be partners in some of these projects because it's in their strategic interest to be partners in some of these projects.
Of course, the problem is governments often pick the wrong partners and the wrong projects.
Yeah, that's true. I made a suggestion in Ottawa at a Canadian Club presentation recently that if I was the new government, I would go out and, just knowing our space, the mining space, and I'd talk to or get together half a dozen senior mining people that have been around, that don't really have a vested interest, not current CEOs, because then you're going to just get moved in certain directions, but people that actually know how to get things done, can step back and look collectively at the opportunity set and work with the government and say, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. Now, there was an objection on the panel. No. Then you're just picking winners and losers. Well, that's what resource development is. You're actually looking at geology and you're trying to understand, well, where's the best opportunity? And how can you actually take geology and build a business that's going to last for multi-decades? And so I think the government could use some insight from experienced people in the mining industry to get the spending right. Because the risk is the government's not the best at spending money. And we know what's going to happen. These things are going to be way over budget. They're going to take way longer. But if you get more industry sort of engagement and advice and counsel along the way, the chances of doing this right and getting it right and being more effective and efficient with how you spend the money and doing it in a way which actually benefits communities and protects our interests, that's going to be the key.
It is a compelling idea. And of course, in our history, there have been times when we've managed to do that. The church and state model of government versus industry has really built up because there's good reasons, conflict reasons, to keep them separate. Do you think we're entering an era where we can find a way to come back together and still protect, obviously, citizens and taxpayers from being abused in any way?
We need to find that way. Because now it's not like Canada's on its own, but we've been sent a message. We've been sent a message that we have to look after business here because that'll make us stronger. And then we call our own shots. And that's important. So that's going to take different conversations and difficult conversations. But that's why I think the government has to be clearer with the plan, with Canadians, because you're going to have to make tough choices. Just spell it out, lay it out. I think over the last 10 years, we didn't have that clear picture. We'd find out after 2 years, oh my goodness, the population is now X. Well, how did that happen? Was that part of the plan? Well, we didn't know about it. So we need to know what's part of the plan. And the plan has to be comprehensive because we're going to need skills. We haven't even talked about that. We're going to need skills. So where are those skills going to come from? We're going to have to train people here, but we may need to access those skills from outside. Okay, how does that affect our immigration policy? We need that comprehensive plan, but we need to be able to articulate it on one page to Canadians because we're going to have to make choices. It can be done. And so, am I hopeful? We're hearing the right things. Let's see. Follow through is going to be so critical, but the clock's ticking. And it's not like we can't wait a year to hear what this plan is. We need to hear it this year, and we need to get things moving.
Sean, we got to leave it there. It's great to have you for this. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you.
We've been speaking with Sean Boyd. Before you go, here are 3 things we think worth noting this week. The Canadian Real Estate Association updated the housing market outlook, and the news is not great. While volume of sales did pick up slightly in June and prices stayed level, CREA is now expecting a 3% decline in home sales for this year. Don't tell that to luxury home buyers, though. Separately, Sotheby's said sales in that category in Toronto at least rose 200% in the first 6 months of the year. The Prime Minister dashed cold water on hopes for a tariff-free future with the U.S., telling reporters this week that some form of tariff will likely exist on the other side of any newly negotiated trade deal. Immediate pushback from the steel industry, which has been suffering under tariffs as high as 50%, but perhaps a reality check for anyone thinking life would go back to some pre-Trump normal when it comes to trade. And finally, 9 First Nations in Ontario have launched a lawsuit against Bill C-5, the One Canadian Economy Act. It aims to get big projects greenlit fast. Their argument that the bill violates their constitutional rights, as well as the now established duty to consult. So, however fast the government was hoping to move, it just had some brakes applied. That's WONK for this week. I'm Amanda Lang.